All right, everybody. Now it's everyone's favorite time. How do we actually set it up and execute it? As Brandon and I talked earlier, a lot of problems we see are fixed just by using this quality setup. Now, if you have something nuanced you like to do that's slightly different than this, that's probably okay. These rules are, more guidelines, if you will, and I could argue that they may even be made to be broken. Brandon's going to show you a different setup that he utilizes and we utilize with some of our top athletes. It looks slightly different. However, steps 1 through 7 are still there. So another way to say this would be if you do something a little bit out of order, for the most part, that's okay. If you, right before unrack and creating some tension, that's really when you force your T-spine into extension and you do other things like set your feet first, I'm probably okay with that. But what we're arguing you shouldn't do is unrack the bar, especially when it's heavy, and then try to set your spine and create a brace and leg drive, things like that. That will not work so well. So we highly encourage you to take steps 1 through 7 for yourself and for your athletes and see if it doesn't just clean up a lot of these problems and faults that we see. Anything to add in there, Brandon, before we dive right in?
No, really excited to get started. Just keep in mind here that we cannot overlook these little things such as the unrack, such as reinforcement, all the things that we cover. If you follow to a T, you'll be amazed in terms of how much it can help you. Developing a cadence around your lifts can help exponentially, and I would argue that it's one of the biggest things that lifters are missing that causes them a lot of issues. So follow this cadence to a T and you'll have some nice success.
A lot of lifters fault on the platform as well. We see it all the time in competition, whether we're wrestling or handling, because they haven't utilized a step-by-step methodical process. They just kind of willy-nilly all the time and do different things at different cadences, and then when they get to the platform, they forget something because they rushed and it was out of order. Once again, this may not be the end-all be-all for you, but if nothing else, we highly suggest learn some of our great cues through this and create your own methodical process. We've just found over time and thousands of athletes that this 7-step process works the best. Cool. Before we put Brandon on the bar, we're going to talk step 0, right? This is like we call it alignment. This is your pre-sequence. If this is happening, right, and you're in a rush, even if it's 135 and you're warming up, we've got a problem here. I threw a plate off to the side on purpose to make a point here, but the bar's crooked. If I'm in a hurry and I lay down, most likely my hands are going to be crooked. Everything else is going to be off. So alignment for us is not just your body. It's going to be when Brandon gets down, but you'll also see, especially in squats and deadlifts too, just take a moment. Are the plates loaded even? Right? Do I have clamps on? That's a little outside what we're asking, but is the bar straight? Is the bench straight if I'm in a power rack, right? Cool. Once we got that down, we'll have Brandon go ahead and get to the bench. And before we utilize step 1, he's also just going to pay attention real quick. Is he in the right spot this way alignment-wise? Are hands in the right general spot? Yes. Okay, let's start our setup. So we're going to create global extension. Now, we know in the bench press, for competition purposes, we usually want the biggest arch possible, but we don't want that to come out of lumbar spine. So we say T-spine bias. Global extension, but we really want T-spine. So Brandon's going to push his sternum up towards the bar. There's multiple ways to accomplish that. We'll talk more details later, just going through our step-by-step process. You will see some leg drive from Brandon as he's actively trying to push his sternum to the bar. At this same time, that's when elbows are also set under the bar. So alignment, Brandon, has grabbed the bar evenly. We started to create that global arch, mostly in the T-spine. This is before tension happens. Brandon wants to make sure his elbows are under the bar. He does not want them here or here like we've already talked about. Slow down. You have a second to check. Things are about to get real, but they're not yet. Cool. So step number 2, once we have that, is our scapular depression. We have an arch, we have elbows under the bar. Here's where we engage the lats or find good scapular depression. Yep, you can see that in the movement of his shirt here. Next, we're going to brace. Pay attention to this cadence every time we talk about it. We brace first, then we breathe into the brace, finishing off quality IAP. Next, we have to look at the feet. Wherever your feet are set, here is not super extreme. We're going to go ahead and root the foot. engaging glutes, getting some tension here, creating more tension, and getting some leg drive. Now, at this point in time, global tension should be completed. Brandon's relaxing here because it's a very long to talk through the setup. Holding that with intent would be very hard. So to walk back through to this point, we've got our T-spine, global extension. We're aligned under the bar with our elbows. We've got our scapular depression. They're in a good position. We've braced. We breathe into the brace. Our IAP is there. We've rooted. We have good leg drive. We've created tension. And the reason I stop here is because sometimes magic happens and you don't even have to unrack the bar. Brandon, just walk yourself through the setup there and create a lot of tension for me. And let's see what happens here live. Right, that bar's already, he wasn't ready. The bar was popping up and down. Happens in the squat as well. That's a great thing because we're creating global tension. Do not unrack the bar until you're to this point. Once you feel that bar start to float, if all of your steps are created, then go ahead and unrack. If the bar is very, very heavy, you'll just feel good tension. It's probably not going to pop out of the rack. Too many people rush their setup in warm-ups. How are you getting good at this if you're not in position, but you just take the bar out and then wiggle into position? All right, so once the bar's out, and we'll take you a little quicker setup through here so you really get these nuanced points. Now we're going to reinforce everything. We could say, depress the scapula, squeeze the bar, breathe and brace, root your feet, but really all those key points. And as Brandon's holding the bar here, I have to note, if he did all those things, but he really noticed he had a bunch of more leg drive there, that was a cue that he lost tension in the unrack sequence. So keep that in your back pocket for yourself and your athletes. Once we're here, the good news is all the hard work's done. You might disagree with me, but all we have to do is, boom, execute. And maintain tensions. That's it. Go ahead and rest, Brandon, and I'll walk you back through. So, the step-by-step process. Step 0, or a pre-setup. Find your alignment. That's all things alignment. Next, we set our global extension in our T-spine. At the same time, where we'll look at that arch, that's when we get those elbows under the bar. Great time to work that scapular depression. You might even find a little more extension through there. Next, we brace. Breathe into that brace. That finishes IAP. Then we're going to go downstream to our feet. Root those feet. Create leg drive. More global tensions created. At this point in time, you have created global tension. You should unrack the bar if it's not already kind of floating itself out on warm-ups. Once the barbell's out, none of this should have been lost. Just check in, reinforce all of it, execute. Good. So I'm going to walk Brandon through a couple coaching points, and then we're going to show an advanced setup. All right, so creating global extension in the T-spine, we have a lot of drills. We'll show a couple attached to this seminar that we really like to help educate that. You've seen things over the years like people laying on foam rollers, shoving things under their body. That works okay. The problem with that is you're creating passive mobility, right? We're not allowing ourselves to learn to get the strength to pull our body into position, let alone holding a barbell over us and bring it down to our chest with hundreds and hundreds of pounds. So if you're only relying on passive mobility, it's a problem. We want some active and some passive. One of the things we can do to help is just encourage movement in the spine. If Brandon grabs the bar, sometimes athletes don't know where they should really drive from. So of course, check in with your athlete, make sure they're okay if you put hands on them. Give me a little arch, Brandon. And I'm going to poke you in the sternum here. I really want you to think about driving sternum towards the barbell. Boom, it created that. For a lot of people that works well. The next one I'm going to do is stick my fist kind of under his upper back. This is really uncomfortable. Yeah, right there. Go ahead and go down in, right there. There's a tactile cue. He doesn't want to lay on my hand. It's uncomfortable. That right there can be just enough to show what part of the spine we really want to extend up off the bench. When we talk about elbows under the bar from a coaching cue, that's pretty easy. I can look down from the top. I can see videos if we're working remotely. It's not there, right? We talk alignment a ton. You just need to encourage the athlete to find alignment. And remember, if Brandon, let's forget the setup, if Brandon unracks here and brings the bar out, notice how the elbows came with. Re-rack. So some people are like, but coach, this is not a good start position. Well, yes, you shouldn't be here. We should have scapula depressed. And that's why Brandon said earlier, this magic window for the barbell. Because if the bar's up here, you will never get stacked underneath the bar. So pretty easy once you find alignment. And remember, it's okay because elbows will come with as the bar unracks. Now, scapular depression, there's multiple things we can do. Our band drill is one of our favorites. But I might have my athlete just grab in front of the bar. Or not grab, arms in front of the bar. And I'll let them shrug up, or I'll tell them to shrug up. Depress scapula, or anti-shrug, one of our favorite cues. A couple more reps. Just teaching them while laying on a bench here what it feels like to depress scapula. Now grab the bar, and we will get that scapular depression. Between that and our band R&T drill, great ways to teach scapular depression. Bracing, like most, let's just get tactile cue. Let's get hands-on. I'm going to put a fist here. Of course, I'm going to check in with my athlete. Brace, breathe into it. Hand should come out more. That breath should not have come up in the chest. We already showed the band drill across the belly. If your clients are working remotely from you, a very good drill. Or get their training partner who's ever getting them spot, lift off. Part of it is a tactile for them to feel. Part of it is for you to see, are we moving the body in the right spots? Rooting, creating leg drive. We've talked about that a little bit as well from a coaching aspect. Sometimes if I have clients with that happy foot, I'll just push down on the foot, mine, and I'll hold them there in position so they understand not to move their feet. There's plenty of rooting drills where we can put a floss band underneath or push and pull and wiggle while they're constantly leg driving, creating that global tension that's very effective. Most of these are going to be hands-on tactile cues. For a lot of athletes, as Brandon can attest to, they're just not being cognizant of their foot. And once we can bring some light to the foot, right, make them think about it, they try a little bit harder, they have a little more intent brought to their foot, it's going to help. All right, creating global tension, if you follow those steps in that order, you have created it. The only problem happens, we see a lot, Brandon, show me an okay setup, and then while you're unracking the bar, kind of lose your setup or your global tension. We see this a ton. Athletes learn the setup. They're really good until that unrack happens, and then they lost things. They've got a decent setup, it looks pretty good. When the bar comes out, something or multiple things fault, and they have to reset once the bar is out. That's a big problem for yourself and your athletes. That is why we have a step to reinforce everything. Because when we know that comes out, and that's just a verbal cue, reinforce. If their lats are pretty good, their bracing is pretty good, and they just have horrible feet, I might take that out and give them an individualized cue and just have them work their feet. Bench comes out, drive your feet into the floor, root your feet, just yell feet, whatever that individualized cue is that can help a ton. And that, of course, that leads into execution. There's a lot of nuanced details, right, about actual execution, of the bench press. Where do I want the touch point? How much do I want you to drive? Techniques we're using, all these things. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about maintaining tension and position, ideal position under the barbell while we execute. If we get our athletes good at that, then we're giving them other things, more advanced techniques, maybe some Spoto presses or some other types of presses. They've learned to hold position. They're going to get really, really good from those lifts. So we suggest taking the print out of this material and utilizing these 7 steps in the gym. Write it down on a notepad, put it on your iPad, put it in your training log so you can actually coach actively through those 7 steps. All that being said, Brandon, let's look at an advanced version of the setup. And execute. Nice. I'll let Brandon talk his way through this here in a second. But as he's resting, you can see that was a lot more efficient setup for Brandon. Everything looked better. Leg drive looked better. Global tension was better. He had a bigger arch. And that's because this is Brandon's actual setup. When he walks back through after he's done talking, I will make sure to point out all of these steps. A couple of them are combined or slightly out of order, but the things that have to happen before the barbell comes out, and once the barbell comes out, they're the exact same. So don't feel like you have to match my setup or a very general setup that we would give beginners or intermediate athletes, because this is a perfect example of how you take these 7 steps and tweak them. Brandon?
Yeah, so it's kind of like when you're a kid and you're first learning a particular skill, or you're trying to develop skill acquisition with a specific sport or something along those lines. When you try to do too many things at once, or you try to go too fast, what does the coach say? Speed comes with time. Go slower for right now. This is very similar. When you first get into these strategies and are learning kind of the foundations to bench press your best, going through this to a T, step by step, is usually the best technique by far. It's going to allow these individuals to feel and experience each one of these things and develop the technique required to do it every single time. But as you get better, as you come along here, I personally believe that combining certain steps for more advanced athletes is far more advantageous, though we still start with the basics. So with that being said, one of the things that you'll notice is when I go to unrack, I don't have scapular depression before I unrack. Instead, I do it as I unrack. But having the average athlete or newer athlete do that is going to be a bit of a shit show. It's going to guarantee or be more likely that they're not going to accomplish it very well. So it's a really good idea for beginners to really delineate or separate each and every one of these steps. But as you develop some prowess around this, you can go ahead and start combining things like I did there. You'll notice that I combined the brace with scapular depression at the same time, and that's what I call the effortless unrack technique. I kind of have my own technique to unrack the weight very easily, where I combine several of these factors, because I've developed the skills to actually do that. So it takes some time. We should start with the basics, more segmented. Then over time, you gain the ability, the opportunity to start combining things to get a more advanced technique.
Awesome. Go ahead and go ahead and move yourself through this. I might pause you a little slower. We'll only run through probably twice. So notice Brandon has taken care of alignment. He knows right where he's at in relation to the bar. Brandon's going to grab the bar. Once his feet get to the floor, go ahead and keep walking yourself through.
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and first row myself to the barbell. I'll row my chin to it. Glutes are going to be on the bench so I can relax. First thing I set is my feet. I'm going to get my feet as far back as possible, and keep in mind if I were actually doing mobility before this, it'd be a hell of a lot better, but I am stiff, so it's not going to be the best example. But I'm going to get my feet as far back as possible. Set up my feet first. Second, I'm going to set up my glutes by getting them further down, jamming my feet even further under me, kind of increasing the spring that we talk about. Then lastly, I set my thoracic extension. And to use my environment to set it better, I'm going to use this barbell, push it in the rack, and push myself as I go sternum to the ceiling into much more thoracic extension. Once I'm here, roll this bad boy back. I'm going to go ahead and slowly breathe in, and then I'm going to time several things at once. The brace, the scapular depression, as well as corkscrewing my feet into the floor. And by doing all these things, once I create tension and lift my glutes up, at the same time, the barbell unracks effortlessly and almost create my body, or turn my body into a bit of a lever.
Yeah, it works really well. Brandon, walk yourself through one more time. I'm going to talk over you here. I might slow you down just a little bit. So what Brandon's doing is creating a lot of global tension, right? And that T-spine, that big arch at the same time. This is all a pre-setup just to get there. It's at this point in time, we started with global extension through the T-spine. That's what Brandon's about to do here as he pushes this barbell into the rack and finds as much extension as it can, shoving himself down. There's already some rooting. Things are already there. Elbows go underneath, right? We have a brace set. Hips come up. Rooting, lats, and brace are locked in at the same time, and that creates the maximum global tension for him that creates the effortless unrack, very similar to what we talked about before. Now all he has to do is just check in. Boom, boom, boom. Reinforce. Execute. I like it. Go ahead and pop on up, sir. Anything to add to our bench setup? Final thoughts, closing words? If you're not working that hard, you need to work on your bench setup.
Yeah, so I have a bit of an extension intolerance in my spine, so it's a bit rough. But even if I didn't, this would be hard. This would be very, very hard. Saying that you always catch me saying, is if you're not extremely uncomfortable in your bench press setup, you are not doing something optimally. It's not meant to be comfortable, it's really not. But putting yourself in more discomfort, really maximizing that coiled spring-like position, allows you to handle more load and to even do so more safely by creating more stable positions. So you should be extremely uncomfortable. It should not be fun to get into. And going slow like this is even harder. At the same time, the payout is huge and more than worth doing.
Slow, methodical steps, and don't change those. We promise awesome results for you and your clients. Just a quick side note about this setup. You should be practicing this on incline. You can find similarities with dumbbells, dumbbell fly, incline dumbbell fly, all of these variations. Feet up bench. I'm primarily doing feet up right now because I'm recovering from back surgery, so I'm not going into any extension at all in my spine. It's flat. I still walk myself through all these steps. Right? I'm not rooting, obviously. My feet are in the air, but the rest of it is methodical, and I'm still thinking, this is where I would root. I think of my leg drive, and I unrack the bar. It's going to help me in the future because I'm thinking about those things. One of the reasons we're so adamant about bracing and quality of bracing is because if you have someone with back pain, back issues, or like myself recovering from an operation, we want to make sure that it's not extension. I can't move super well right now, but not a bunch of extension coming from my lumbar spine. The extension really comes from the upper back. Now, if we were talking to not powerlifting athletes, we might pull this arch down a little bit and talk about longevity, but since we're specifically talking to powerlifting coaches and powerlifting athletes, it's important to note that how much you'll allow your athlete to bend their spine and force an arch is really up to you and them and their goals. If I have a beginner powerlifter or a master's athlete that just enjoys the sport and wants to have fun and they really want health and longevity, I'm going to encourage them to open up their T-spine as much as possible and create a little softer arch and brace very hard. If we brace from a maximum, I can't even get there, you can't either, but think of some of those very bendy athletes we've seen. If they braced really hard, they would actually pull themselves out of their arch most likely a little bit. And that's where we encourage someone who is not trying to be the most high-end bench presser they can, or dealing with injuries, or just more fun for the sport. Again, like we'll teach in squats, or you've already heard in squats, that this is not a one-size-fits-all. Just because we see some of the best benchers in the world arching and Brandon out benches me and I want to get strong like him, so I match his bench press setup. If his goals are different than mine, that may not be the best decision for my client. So don't try to make all of your clients match the same style. Find what's tolerable for them and don't forget about their goals. Utilize these 7 steps to make it effortless and flawless.
Yeah, and a really important note here as well is on the reverse end of things, I have to mention this because it drives both me and Kyle absolutely crazy. We've had plenty of seminar experiences where we teach this, and there's a few individuals in the crowd that say, it's a power lifter style of bench press, and I'm going to go ahead and go flat back, not worry about the tension, not worry about scap depression, not worry about these things. So that's for power lifters. These are the foundations of loaded movement. The exact details of how we go about it do change due to the population that we're working with, but the foundations stay the same. So for example, no matter who I'm working with, I'm still going to try to maximize thoracic extension, but I may change how far they need to get their feet back, how much they need to arch. There's certain things, little details that might change, but at the same time, the foundations are still there. This is not the power lifter style of bench pressing. This is the style of bench pressing if you want to maximize your ability to handle load and stay safe as you do so.